So, good afternoon. Okay, just closing the doors. I feel like I'm a bit the weird duck in the conference because I'm going to talk about observability, but I'm not going to talk about the technical part of observability, but more the cultural part of observability. Um, my name is Kris Buytaert. I've been doing conferences for 2 decades now. And when I first did conferences, I was a developer. I did Perl, Java, so I still know stuff what's being talked about here. And I kind of became an operations person because I was the only one who knew how to cluster applications. I was the only one who knew how to rack machines. Um, Somewhere along the journey, I'm responsible for creating a couple of conferences. Um, Probably the most famous one you know of is DevOps Days, which I started together with Patrick Dubois 15 years ago in Ghent. Since then, lots of people have the title DevOps engineer. Sorry, that was definitely not what we planned for. You're probably doing it wrong if that's your job title. Um, and I get to rant about things that aren't done the right way. Most people curse at me on social media when they bump into yet another DNS problem, because when I was still blogging, the title of my blog was Everything Was a Fucking DNS Problem. DNS actually stands for DevOps Needs Sushi. That's how people start to collaborate and how people start to talk to each other. You can find me on social media and stuff. So, why am I talking about observability? Because I'm a DevOps person, right? Well, if you look at the CAMS keyword from ages ago, the M in a CAMS keyword, culture automation, stands for observability. It's when we moved from monitoring SOCs, who still remembers the monitoring SOCs movement? We moved from monitoring SOCs to monitoring love and back, I guess. So to me, observability is what we talk about when we talk about the CAMS keyword and the M there. But more, like, it's this new hype, right? I mean, this talk is probably like 2 years old. The hype is still here. The hype is still getting bigger. At some point, everybody was doing Docker. It was going to solve all of our problems. Then Kubernetes was going to solve all of our problems. Did I work for anybody? Do you feel where I'm going? I mean, who's doing observability here? If you're really doing observability here, you probably should move to a different room because you're not going to learn anything. But if you think you are doing it, yeah. Let's take a step back. Let's get some boring definitions out there. Like, what is monitoring? I mean, the basics. Like, you look high level at a service or a component, you figure out if it's still there, if it's still working, and you focus on the technical components, like is this web server still there? Is this application still functioning the way I want? And is it even healthy? And you figure out what's going on. Observability doesn't do it that way. It says you want to figure out and understand how your service behaves. You want to look at it, look at the ecosystem around you and figure out, hey, what's happening around me? It answers what's going on. How many people have seen slides today where they talk about the 3 pillars? Skip those because everybody knows them. Like, but what's the 4th pillar? Any guesses? Sushi as a 4th pillar. Interesting. This is potentially the 4th pillar. Profiling could be the 4th pillar. I don't like to talk about pillars. I like to talk more about layers, like maturity going up. You start with the foundations and you add more and more things. And then things like traces and profiling are higher layers, and monitoring the basics is the lower level. But it's a different way of looking at it. The real question is, how do all of these things connect? Because to me, I think monitoring is required. Like, most organizations need monitoring. And if you're lucky, that's enough. And I think the lucky part is for probably 80 to 90% of the organizations, it's going to be enough. And we're in Europe, so maybe even more. But observability is about removing that luck and getting that next step, getting to that next layer in the cake. And that's basically what Julian Pivotal, who's the Prometheus maintainer, actually one of my colleagues, said. Like, that's what to him was observability. It's about removing that luck and not having to depend on it. So, traditional monitoring. What's wrong with it? I'm a consultant. I run engineering departments. I've been helping people to deliver software with open source tools. I've been building things. So for the past 2.5 decades, I've been walking into organizations that had problems that needed to be solved. And in a lot of cases, that was, this thing is broken, how do we fix this? Main problems with monitoring is alert fatigue. People go like, yeah, we stopped looking at our monitoring, we don't have time for it, we get paged for things that we shouldn't get paged, and it's broken. Can you fix this? Okay. And why is it that way? Because they configured their monitoring completely manually. It's completely drifted from reality. It has nothing to do with what's actually in their ecosystem. And how do you fix that? By automating the hell out of it. By making sure that if you deploy a new service, it's monitored automatically, it's registered somewhere, it's in a single source of truth, and when you decommission it, it's removed. So alert fatigue doesn't happen. Other problem with monitoring, it's a binary state. It works, it doesn't work. Maybe if a service is degrading, that's for most organizations not really a problem. But again, the real problem with monitoring is alert fatigue, alert fatigue, alert fatigue. People just don't look at the alerts anymore. So how do we fix that? Well, I'll go back to some of the use cases I had over the past couple of years. And each and every of those use cases were customers that called up and said, hey, we want to do observability. Okay. And as a consultant, after a couple of times, you start seeing patterns. So the first case study was a large government organization. They had a pretty huge checkmk set up. They had a bunch of custom checks in there, but it was all manually, like really manually. And there was no automation in place. They had a CMDB, but it was completely out of sync with reality. And they called it SRE team. I think that's when I started joking that SRE is basically service restart engineer. But they were really happy with the tool they had, but they had absolutely no trust in the people they were collaborating with, because people were just decommissioning things, they were not telling them, and they're having alerts all over the place. And they had no ownership for any of the services. So management had read some paper somewhere or some advertisement, and they wanted observability. Okay. So their approach, yeah, we're going to start again from scratch. We're going to take this new tool to start with. And for them, taking that new tool was observability. And they wanted Prometheus. Okay. So they spent internally about a year saying, hey, we're going to do this new observability thing. We're going to do that on our new stack. They had a couple of pilot programs where they were moving maybe 5% of their services to a new Kubernetes stack. And if that works, then we're going to migrate the whole ecosystem that's next to it. Okay. We were like, nah, that's not going to work. The result basically was what we predicted. The old tool was still there doing the alerting. They, rather than moved forward, now had 2 stacks, and no real observability really happened. But management said, hey, we're doing observability. That was the first one. So, second ecosystem. Completely different environment. This was an organization that was heavily vested in automation. They had, I think, 1,500 to 2,000 VMs running on public and private cloud. And they had a Kinga fully automated. If they spun something new up, it worked. They could remove it. They had a really happy on-call team. I mean, people wanted to be in the on-call because when there was something that happened, it was because it was really going to be a challenge and it was going to be something that they were going to learn from. There was close to no false positives. And then they built, another team started building a new container stack. Okay. They chose Prometheus. Their first kind of alerts, it was like a small group of people that got alerts via Telegram. They were completely unclear. Nobody knew what the alert meant. Some gibberish. It had plenty of false positives. And then they said, hey, we built this. Now we give it to the people who are on call. And they said, no, we don't want this. But it's shiny new. It's like the new tool. You get these fancy new things. They never took that new platform into 24/7. They just said, no, we're not going to do this. You fix your stuff. And then we started working with them and discussing like, hey, but what about you really want? What about getting other data in there and figuring things? And after 18 months, we finally started getting there and get some real stuff in there. So, third customer case. Another customer like, hey, we want observability. Because we have a performance problem. Okay, maybe that's a better use case. Oh, and we want alerts on our cron jobs. What does that have to do with observability? I don't know. And we want dashboards. Okay. That was a software as a service platform. So we started working with them. What was the reality? Well, we want observability, but we didn't bother to look at our basic MySQL logs, which was full of slow query logs. Why do you want observability if you don't look at your logs? We actually already have alerts on those cron jobs, but we've been ignoring them. We just want them different. Okay. And then you want dashboards of business metrics. Yes, and they magically need to happen. But you're not exposing any metrics from your application. How do we need to figure out what's relevant for you? Yeah, we just want Grafana. Okay, that's not how it works. So at that point, I was like, okay, who's really doing observability? Because this is like snapshots from 2 years of consultancy, and nobody was doing observability. Actually, I gave an Ignite with one of these cases a couple of years ago in Berlin, and I got a call from a customer, a different one, who said, hey, why did you talk about us as a use case without asking? I was like, that was not about you. But the fact that you recognize yourself, yeah. So where's the real observability? I mean, we often have metrics. But since we moved to Prometheus and we moved away from Graphite, we didn't change our retention, and now it's the default, and we only have it for 30 days and not longer. So we kind of lost all the benefits we had. We have logs somewhere, but 10 years ago, we had logs, and from those logs, we took derived metrics, and from those derived metrics, we created dashboards, and we threw away the logs. Now we have logs for 3 days, and we never look at them. And we're actually not even sure anymore if we're shipping those logs. We're only alerting on a bunch of those metrics, but we're not learning anymore. So even if 5 to 10 years ago, we didn't call it observability, well, maybe we did. We did much more with the data that we had than we do right now. So we kind of regressed. And if you're old enough, you see this over and over again. We introduce a new tool, Docker, Cube, Prometheus. I don't know which one next. Oh, I'll know which one next, but I'm not going to spoil it because that's the end of the talk. And we're going to figure out like, hey, this old tool we have doesn't work. We're going to put in place a new tool, observability. And now we're going to implement it without changing the way we use it. And now we're stuck. And we're going to do that over and over again till we retire. So how do we get to observability? Well, how did I get to observability in a couple of places? Let me put it that way. First of all, I'm trying to figure out why you want this. And oh no, I didn't put it on this slide yet. Oh yeah, it is. Gartner told us because it's cool. Sadly, that is why some people want to do observability. Or we just want Prometheus, Loki, and Tempo. Like, okay. Not that long ago, I had a customer who said, yeah, we want Prometheus. Turned out they didn't want Prometheus at all. They wanted Promtail. They didn't even know the difference between the two tools. But they had heard something, and they wanted to have the hipster credits to do the tool and figure out. And that's not why you want to do this. Figuring out why your system goes down, figuring out why your performance is slow, figuring out how it behaves, learning so you can improve, that's a good reason. But because it's Gartner said, yeah, please don't. And then I think the first step really is go back and fix your monitoring. Like really fix your monitoring. Because for most of those organizations, they don't have automation in place, they don't have actionable alerts, they don't have a single source of truth, and they're still in monitoring hell. They're still having that massive amount of breaking things. And when you fix your monitoring, then keep it green. Get rid of all the alerts. Make sure your stack still runs. To me, that is step 2. You can have a question. That was like... So, what is monitoring is what is going on to me, and observability is why is this going on. But if you don't know yet what is going on, it's going to be hard to figure out why it's going on. So first, fix the monitoring part. It's down, it's broken, it's slow. Now, how many times do I have to click to get back where I was? Sorry. Oh, yeah. Fix your monitoring. And that also means things like, yeah, we know this thing doesn't work, but we've acknowledged it, and it's been acknowledged for 6 months, and now it suddenly on a Monday morning pops out of acknowledgement. Fuck, what happened? Oh, nothing happened. It's been like that for 6 months. Well, either fix it, fix the alert, or things like that. And then start actually fixing your metrics. Because I'm pretty sure that you have regression in your metrics. You're not shipping, you're not collecting the metric you really cared about. I personally know that I had to fix MySQL slow query metrics at least 5 times over the past 12 years because they slightly changed. And it was a different variable. And the dashboard I was looking at was like, where's my metrics? Why? I could find them eventually, but the place I wanted to look at them was different. And it evolved because people upgraded things, people changed things, and they didn't know that those were things that people cared about, and they never got the feedback. So you have broken dashboards. I bet you have broken dashboards. Who can confirm that they have no broken dashboards? Okay. And then you need to fix your log shipping. Are you sure you're actually shipping your logs? I'm sure I am now. But I know that at some point, some filters were broken and some things didn't happen, and we didn't actually have tests to verify that we have our logs shipped. So we were looking at partial data. So what's still missing then? And here's where all the observability vendors are going to hate me, but I think for the majority of organizations, definitely in Europe, probably nothing. This is what you need. This is more than enough for a large group of people. Except if you're not. If you're a bit more advanced, then you might need things like traces, you might need things like profiling, and then things start to get funny and complicated. Does anybody still remember PacketBeat? PacketBeat was this awesome tool that at some point got acquired by Elastic. I don't even remember what year this was, but you had this graphical overview. You could drill down to any HTTP request all the way down to SQL query. It was ages ago, and then they got acquired, and the next release dropped all of those features. It was open source, but was unmaintained, and the older release started not working anymore. I was like, this is actually what most organizations need. Like just, oh, this is a request, click. It was that, worked. And I so missed it. How is this back here? Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, no, this, yeah. So, traces, other things. You've got your monitoring and your metrics fixed and your logging. And the next question is, where do you go? What does the team really need? What are they looking for? Like, get them in a room and definitely get those people that want to learn how their systems behave in a room. Get them to work together and figuring out what's really hurting them. And then you can see, hey, we need better dashboards. We actually want traces. We actually need profiling. I mean, this is trivial, right? Get people in a room, get them to collaborate. But like, we've been doing DevOps days for 15 years and people still don't collaborate. It's painful. It's hard. So once you figure out what, then you can start looking at choosing an observability stack. And I'm an open source person, so I have to warn that there's lots of open source out there, things that don't work, things that will basically claim to be open, but they're not. I prefer things that I can control as opposed to it's somewhere in the cloud and, oh, now I cannot access my data anymore. I mean, it's a question you need to ask. When do you want to access your data? Do you want other people to be able to access it? For some organizations, it's just throw it in the cloud. It's going to work for us because they're already fully in there. But for other organizations, meaning no, it needs to be our data. It needs to be within our ecosystem. And then you can actually start choosing those tools. Collaborative, figuring out how things work. I think one of the things a lot of us forget is we need to monitor the tools that we actually use for observability, because if they're not working, then it doesn't work. And then pick like this one pilot project. Find that team that says, hey, we have this pain, and start with them. Not throw it all over the place. Figuring out how that one team can actually benefit from the tools you as a group have chosen, and start building dashboards together with them and figuring out how they can use the tools so they can go to their peers, they can go to their other friends and say, hey, we've actually used these tools. It's not somebody who set up a tool and yeah, now it's there. Get those people to talk about how they benefited from using the tools that you chose with them. And then you're going to DDoS yourself. You're going to fail. You're going to flood your disk. You're going to get way too much data you never cared about. Or not, if you listen to what we've told before. But it's going to be a complex setup if you want to run that internally. Like for your metrics, you need to have a massive amount of exporters. You need to have all of these things. You want to think about long-term storage, your logs. Like there are some options, but it gets complex really fast if you want these things. So some people say, hey, I want to have the proprietary end, and then you go like, yeah, those vendors say they got everything working out of the box. I mean, we got magic traces and all things work. But the developers say it doesn't. In most of the cases I've seen, trust the developers, don't trust the salespeople from the tool. Like, do the proof of concept, see if it works. Like this guy. Instrumentation. There's a lot of frameworks out there that do tracing, check the maturity. Things have evolved. Like years ago, PHP was a big no-go. Java and Golang were much more advanced. Check for the language ecosystem you care about. I mean, things are moving fast. So, it's all magic, right? Well, different libraries, different languages, and then we got to eBPF. I like to call eBPF basically a marriage of S-trace and TCP/dump on steroids. It's probably not what people wanted, but it's a framework that allows you to do much more. Like building observability tools. Like, maybe this is the magic we want. Maybe this is where we get. But then you get stuck in a different cycle. Okay, maybe a snapshot check. Who's not running everything they have on Kubernetes? So you realize there's a world outside of Kubernetes. Who's running everything they have on Kubernetes? Two persons. Okay, and that to me feels like reality. Like there's absolutely organizations that are young that have moved everything there, that started out there. But if you look at larger organizations, it's maybe 5 to 10% of the workload. So try to look at the modern tooling. Try to look at things like eBPF tools. It works out of the box on Kube, but if you're outside of Kube, it's hard. I mean, this is a variety of tools that I bumped into when I did the research, and if it has Kubernetes behind bracket, it basically means that's the only place it's going to work. But my database is somewhere else than the application, and it's all over the place. So things like Pixie and others, they're cool tools, but they're not going to help me if I'm not running on that stack. I bumped into co-roots a couple of, not that long ago, I think 6 to 9 months ago. And to me, that actually was a tool that, for me, it worked. It works on all platforms. It's completely cloud agnostic. It's open source. I can run it on Kube. I can run it on proprietary container ecosystems, Nomad, stuff like that. I can run it on bare metal. It's client agent. It's eBPF based, so it gives me that magic. It does profiling, Periscope based. It ships metrics, logs, traces. It's zero instrumentation, and it basically per project stores things in either Prometheus or ClickHouse. And it gave me that. I've already got my monitoring, my metrics, my logs in place. I want to go to that next step and really quickly benefit from what's happening within my ecosystem. And I got this again, like the magical, this is what my ecosystem looks like. It was fun again, and almost packet beat. And for me, that was like getting back to the joy of finding a tool that could help me debug things at a really fast scale, give me insights in my ecosystem. It was open source, it worked on the platforms I liked, and it's really simple to deploy. And it gave me back that joy and that getting to work with teams again that said, hey, it's a tool we chose that worked. We got benefits out of it. And I think challenges for people is to find a tool they like. Maybe it's code, maybe it's something else. I particularly like the fact that the upstream open source developers were really fast with, hey, I found this bug or thingy and fixing it. But that was what it did for me. And you need to figure out what it does for you. So, biggest message from me today is you might not need observability yet. But you do need to fix your monitoring. Start with fixing your monitoring. If you just go into observability and don't fix your monitoring, your folks still won't be happy. And probably fixing your monitoring is going to require fixing your culture, fixing your automation. And then we're back where we all started 15 years ago with the DevOps movement. But just adding a new tool to your stack, just trying to do this observability thing is not going to fix your broken monitoring. That was my story. I think we have time for questions. Okay. So the question is, he's curious how to automate monitoring. To me, that comes back to the A part in the CAMS keyword, which is the automation part, which means full infrastructure as code, full desired state automation, which means to me that you still, when you're doing infrastructure as code or configuration management, and to me, infrastructure means everything you need to run an application. So everything around it, going from provisioning of VMs, network configuration, all the things, all of that stuff needs to be automated. And I think you still need 3 types of tools. That's one that does provisioning, talks to an API to spin things up. 2, tool that does desired state. And when I talk provisioning, it's typically something like Tofu, or talking about the open source part, so OpenTofu or Pulumi, that kind of stuff. Then you still gonna have a bunch of VMs out there and things like that where you want to define the state they should be in. There you need to have a tool like Puppet or Chef or Salt that says, hey, it's going to be in this state and I want to keep it in this state, and that's going to be reacting when it changes. That's going to build your single source of truth, and based on that single source of truth, you can actually generate your monitoring. In a kube ecosystem, that means you're going to have an operator that's going to configure your monitoring part, things like that. But kind of depends on what's in your ecosystem, obviously. The provisioning part, you could also using Tofu to spin up all the queue parts if it talks to an API. And then there's a third component that you need, which is actually an orchestration part where you say, hey, do me these, and these actions on this set of labels and this set of tools and this set of ecosystems. And with that completely, no manual changes. It's okay. No manual changes. Then you get to a healthy ecosystem where you know that if you change a property somewhere, if you change something that scales out, if you decommission it or you reprovision something, it's gonna be in your monitoring system and it's gonna be correct. But as soon as you allow people to do manual configuration of your monitoring system, and it doesn't matter which tool, as soon as you allow people to manually configure things, you're gonna get drifted to alert fatigue, and you're gonna get to a point where, hey, yeah, it's been down for 3 weeks, but nobody cares. And that's what you want to prevent. And that means you need to do infrastructure automation. You need to do it at some level. Other questions? In the back. I don't know. For the past 15 years, I have built things on clouds, but cloud agnostic, because most of my customers were like, yeah, we're on-prem now, we're going to move there, and then we're going to move there. I have customers who moved from one cloud provider to another one, and I needed to build things that I could move around. So I've never bought into, except if they're actually offered API compatible open source tools that I could just consume as if I would have set them up. I've never used any of them. So I can't compare that. Maybe other people in the room can, I don't know. Question. Is it possible to have 0 alerts? No, because at some point the data center is going to go on fire and you want to be alerted about that. Even if you have full automated failover, you want, if the data center is on fire, you want to know, just to verify. That's another story, that's another talk. But the difference between a healthy monitoring ecosystem with a good culture and a broken one is having, on the amount of checks you have, on the amount of devices, having less than 1% of alerts, because there's always things going on, as opposed to there's 20% of the devices or 20% of the services with some kind of error warning or whatever. But I've run teams where we got to less than 1% on thousands of services. And that is, once you get there, it's a different game. But it's about reducing the alerts, and yeah, because things will fail. Software will eventually work and hardware will eventually fail. So you, at some point, you're going to have a page from something. But it's about making sure that that page you get is actually a valuable bomb, which is actionable, where you can do something with it, and not like spend our half a day like figuring out what was this alert. Oh, it's nothing. All right. Cool. Thank you.